Hi everybody, in this video we're going to look at the potential weaknesses of demand-side policy. So if the government decides to use fiscal or monetary policy to affect aggregate demand, where can this actually go wrong or not be as effective as they wanted it to be? So in really simple terms, there are 7 main areas for discussion here. The first one is that the policies themselves can be conflicting. So, for example, in 2008, in the financial crisis, what they found was that if you used expansionary fiscal policy, and in particular, if they increased government spending, this would actually increase the national debt. And then for future generations, this would be really bad because they'd have to pay back more debt, and that would mean that in future taxes would have to go up. They therefore decided after 2008 in the UK, many economists, they thought that if you wanted to expand the economy and increase aggregate demand, you should use monetary policy. So you should put down interest rates and or use quantitative easing. And they then said that if you wanted to contract the economy to make aggregate demand go down, you should use fiscal policy. So you should put up taxes or decrease government spending. Because their argument was that if you used expansionary fiscal policy here, this would actually lead to a lot of national debt. So there's some argument that these should be used in this manner, depending on what's happening in the economy. The next one, if we look at the rate of interest, you can have a problem because the rate of interest, if you're using expansionary monetary policy, this is where you're trying to increase your aggregate demand. But the problem is, if you want to lower your rate of interest to do this, there will be limit on lowering your rate of interest. Again, in the financial crisis, they came across a problem because they had a very low rate of interest, and there was a question about what to do when it got to zero. And this has happened in Japan, where they haven't been able to lower the rate of interest any lower, so they've actually had negative interest rates sometimes in Japan. And it can be considered a limit on expansionary monetary policy. Whereas if you put down taxes and increase government spending using fiscal policy, then you won't encounter this difficulty. The next one is the size of the multiplier. So what is this? It can be very difficult to know what the multiplier, or K, actually is. So you don't know when you increase aggregate demand what the final increase in aggregate demand will be. So what might happen is that they put up aggregate demand through expansionary fiscal or monetary policy, thinking it will increase by, say, 10 units, but actually it increases by 12 units because of the multiplier, or it increases by 17 units because of the multiplier. But if you don't know the size of the multiplier, what might happen is, for example, if you're increasing aggregate demand, they may actually cause inflation to occur, because it might be that aggregate demand goes up too much and you actually end up causing demand pull inflation. That would be a problem. The next thing that we can look at is the speed of adjustment and how quickly the policy can take effect. If you are a Keynesian economist, they think that it's possible, for example, to have high unemployment for a long time. They think you can have people who are looking for a job, they want a job they can't find on, that this can endure for a long period of time. And they therefore think that you would probably need things like expansionary fiscal policy, the government spending more money to try and create more jobs in this way. Whereas if you are a classical economist, then they will think you're not going to have unemployment for a long time. They think that the labour market quickly corrects itself unless the there's a problem with the supply side of the economy. So they think long-term unemployment is only due to supply side issues. And we'll look at these in another video, but the supply side means that you're not capable of supplying enough in your economy. Your aggregate supply is limited, and that's what's causing unemployment. This is what classical economists would say. So therefore, the classical economists think that you can correct for unemployment in the short term unless there's a problem on the supply side. The next issue to look at is national debt. If the government were to use expansionary fiscal policy, and this led to a budget deficit in a year, and this in turn was increasing the national debt, this would be a problem for future generations because this must be repaid. Therefore, this is an argument against expansionary fiscal policy, and its argument to use expansionary monetary policy instead, because you won't end up with this addition to the national debt. Final two here, the one about the time lag. There's an example here would be if you're using expansionary fiscal policy and you use it to improve, for example, the road network and the pavements in the UK. This is an increase in government spending. But the impact, the pavements, this will be immediate, but the impact of improving the roads in the UK will only have an impact probably over the longer term. The money that's going to be spent on doing this, it'll happen over a long period of time, and therefore it will not quickly increase aggregate demand, and that can be a problem if you are trying to increase your aggregate demand very quickly. The final one is the low precision of using demand-side policies, because actually how much control does the government have over what's happening in the economy? Because there are always going to be external shocks, things that are outside of the control of policy set by the government. So it doesn't matter how much you use your monetary fiscal policy if these external costs are going to completely disrupt what's happening. So something like, for example, the oil price. If this changes suddenly, this could really affect the economy, and it won't matter really about the demand side policy that's put in place. This will overrule that. And therefore, in reality, the precision of using demand-side policies can arguably be quite limited.